In this session, we will discuss about business cycles, and business cycles are the study of economic fluctuations. Now, if you see Indian economy's growth performance, say over last 30 years, perhaps the average or trend growth rate was 7% per annum, but it is not that every year the Indian economic growth fluctuates from year to year and can bring down this variability in growth rate to more moderate levels, or can we bring the growth rate to its trend growth rate? That is the issue, and we will use the model of aggregate demand and aggregate supply to study how economic activity can be either can be raised to a higher level or can be moderated to a relatively lower level. Now, to use the aggregate demand aggregate supply model, I need to first understand what the aggregate demand curve represents and what the aggregate supply curve represents, and how these curves can be used to represent economic activity at a particular level, so that we can appreciate when the aggregate demand and aggregate supply situation changes, how the economic activity also undergoes a change. So first of all, we know that the in microeconomics, the demand curve for a product, the market demand curve for a product was downward sloping, where I had what I had price level of the product, price of the product on the y-axis, and the quantity of the product in the x-axis. That was in microeconomics. Okay, in macroeconomics, what we would represent in the y-axis, instead of price of an individual product, we will represent the price level or the CPI. Let us try to evaluate whether the aggregate demand curve in macroeconomics is a blown up version of the. We can appreciate the distinction between the microeconomics and macroeconomics version of demand if we take note of the fact that in microeconomics, when we consider the demand for individual products, and if the price of one product increases, producers have an incentive to produce more of that product. I am able to increase production of one commodity when I am using more factors of production, and this I am able to do when I am drawing factors of production from other industries to this industry. Now that this is possible when I am considering or I am analyzing one industry, but when I consider all industries, I cannot draw resources from one industry to another. So I need to look at the aggregate demand curve from a different perspective. The aggregate demand curve in macroeconomics is also downward sloping, but not for the reasons that we have used in microeconomics. So I need because I cannot draw resources from one industry to another when I'm considering all industries taken together, which is the GDP. Then I need a different framework to understand why the aggregate demand curve is downward sloping. Now, the aggregate demand curve is downward sloping because of uh, three effects. What one is known as the wealth effect, second is the interest rate effect, and third is the exchange rate effect. Okay. Now let us discuss each of these in some detail. Okay. Okay. Each of these three effects are bringing about how GDP behaves when the overall price level or the average price level undergoes a change. Suppose initially the price level was P0, which was corresponding to a output level of Y0. This was our initial situation. Now suppose the price level increases from P0 to P1. Now what will be the impact on Y0? As per this diagram, Y0 should decline from Y0 to Y1. Why this happens? We are saying this happens because of three reasons: the wealth effect, the interest rate effect, and the exchange rate effect. How does the wealth effect work? Now when price level goes up, the real income of people goes down. The money that you have in your wallet is now worth less because it can buy less goods and services, because price level has gone up. Suppose price level has doubled, then what does that mean? I can buy what I need. uh, I need twice the amount of money to buy the same old goods and services, or in other words, the money that is with me is now worth half what it was earlier. Now when you are able to buy less goods with the money available with you, people would feel relatively poorer, and when you are feeling poorer, you would not like to consume as much, so that people's consumption spending is adversely impacted because people are feeling poorer. This is also called the real balance effect. So the net effect is when price level goes up, you are finding the consumption goes down because people now feel relatively less well off or relatively poorer. Now, how does the interest rate effect work? When price level goes up, we said to carry out the old transactions, you need now more money, and when you require more money, what it does, when price level goes up, you require more money, you are making more frequent withdrawals from your savings bank account, which leads to a situation when more and more people are withdrawing larger amounts of cash. There is less there is less deposits with the banks, or the funds available with the banks decline. And as the funds available with the banks decline, we find that now, assuming that demand for funds has not changed, that would lead to a scenario of a increased interest rate. And this increased interest rate leads to, as we have seen, a drop in investment. So the wealth effect was leading to a fall in consumption. The interest rate effect leads to a fall in investment, because when prices are going up, people are withdrawing more from the banks, less money is available with the banks, so there is credit rationing takes place, which leads to increase in interest rate, which has a adverse impact on I, because we know I is equal to I0 minus FR. It is inversely related to R. So when R goes up, I falls. Okay. And coming to the exchange rate effect, we just mentioned that if you see from the interest rate effect, when prices or price level is going up, interest rates are also increasing. So interest rate across the spectrum when goes up, the interest rate on bonds are also increasing. Okay, so when interest rate on domestic bonds increase compared to the interest that is earned in the foreign countries, this we have discussed while discussing about exchange rate behavior, or how exchange rate changes. Now what happens, because of the interest rate differential between domestic economy and the foreign economy, domestic economies are relatively higher, which leads to capital inflow into the domestic economy. So that means more dollars are coming into Indian economy for conversion into rupee, so that the foreign investor can buy Indian bonds, which is giving a higher rate of return. Now when this happens, more dollar inflows come, that leads to an appreciation of the rupee. And when rupee appreciates, what that leads to, when the rupee appreciates, that means exchange rate goes up. So we started with a scenario where price level had gone up, which led to an increase in interest rate, which has led to capital inflows and an appreciation of the domestic currency. Now, we have seen the impact of exchange rate appreciation on exports and imports. When when exchange rate appreciates, exports gets dampened and imports get a boost. So you have, that means when exchange rate is going up, our products are appearing now relatively costlier, and imports, you can buy the foreign goods at with relatively lesser amount of Indian currency, so that imports get a boost, exports are dampened, so that leads to a net exports decline. So the exchange rate effect is leading to a drop in net exports, and we know Y is equal to what? C plus I plus G plus X minus M or NX. Now the wealth effect said when P is rising, when P goes up, we are saying that C is falling because of wealth effect, I is falling because of interest rate effect, G is exogenous, and X minus M or NX is also falling because of the exchange rate effect. Okay, so the net impact is Y will fall. Okay, so if I see my previous diagram, what I am getting when price level goes up from P0 to P1, output will fall from Y0 to Y1. So we have a negative slope of the aggregate demand curve.